In this episode, we're going to build a clear mental model of the incident response cycle and, just as importantly, where a Security Operations Center, SOC, fits into that cycle when the situation shifts from routine alert handling into a true security incident. Many new learners picture incident response as a single frantic activity, like hunting down an attacker, but the reality is a sequence of phases that each have a different goal, a different kind of evidence, and a different kind of decision-making. When you understand the cycle, you stop treating incidents as random emergencies and start treating them as manageable processes that move from readiness to action to recovery. That understanding matters for the exam because it tests whether you can reason about what should happen next, not just define terms. It also matters in practice because teams that do not share a cycle model waste time debating priorities, repeating work, or taking actions that accidentally damage evidence. By the end, you should be able to explain the cycle in plain language and point to exactly how SOC operations support each phase without becoming chaotic or tool-dependent. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong way to grasp the incident response cycle is to treat it as a loop that begins before the incident and continues after the immediate threat is gone, because the cycle is designed to produce better outcomes over time, not just to survive a single event. At a high level, the cycle includes preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, recovery, and learning, and each phase is a checkpoint with a purpose. Preparation is about making sure response is possible. Detection and analysis is about determining what is happening and how severe it is. Containment is about limiting harm while the investigation continues. Eradication is about removing the attacker's foothold and cause. Recovery is about restoring trustworthy operations. And learning is about improving the system so the next incident is handled faster and with less damage. If you blur these phases together, you can end up doing containment before you understand scope, or doing recovery before you have removed the cause, and those mistakes can prolong the incident. When you keep the phases distinct, you can make cleaner decisions and communicate more clearly. The SOC plugs in across the cycle, but its influence is strongest where evidence and decision speed matter most. Preparation is the phase people talk about least during calm periods, yet it quietly determines whether every later phase is smooth or chaotic, and the SOC plays a central role because it owns much of the monitoring and evidence readiness. Preparation includes making sure telemetry is collected, searchable, and enriched so investigations do not start from zero, and it includes making sure alert workflows can escalate cleanly into incident handling. It also includes defining who is called, what information is required at escalation time, and how decisions are approved when containment could disrupt business operations. From a SOC standpoint, preparation means the alert pipeline has clear classification, documentation habits are consistent, and there is a reliable way to preserve and reference evidence. Preparation also means practicing the transition from a single alert to a coordinated case, because that transition is where confusion often begins. When the SOC prepares well, it reduces the time spent hunting for basic facts and reduces the temptation to improvise risky actions. Good preparation is not about writing long plans, but about making readiness conditions true every day. Detection and analysis is the phase most learners associate with the SOC, and for good reason, because this is where monitoring turns potential signals into a defensible understanding of what is happening. Detection is not only the moment an alert fires, because it includes recognizing patterns across alerts, noticing gaps or anomalies in telemetry, and observing changes in behavior that suggest a developing incident. Analysis is the work of building a hypothesis about the incident, testing it with evidence, and refining it until you have a coherent story about scope, tactics, and likely impact. The SOC plugs in by validating evidence quality, correlating identity, endpoint, network, and application signals, and using enrichment to rapidly judge which assets and accounts are most important. A key beginner misunderstanding is thinking analysis must be perfect before action, when the real goal is to reach enough confidence to choose a safe next step. In this phase, the SOC is the evidence engine, and the quality of its data, pivots, and triage habits determines whether the incident is understood quickly or remains a foggy guess. Strong SOC operations turn uncertainty into clarity fast. Containment is the phase where teams limit the damage while the investigation is still ongoing. And this is where SOC operations must connect evidence to action without skipping the discipline that prevents unnecessary disruption. Containment can mean limiting access, isolating affected systems, blocking suspicious communication paths, or restricting privileges. But the important point is that containment decisions must be informed by the current understanding of scope and risk. The SOC plugs in by providing timely evidence about what appears affected, what appears unaffected, and which actions are most likely to stop spread without breaking critical workflows. Another beginner misunderstanding is assuming containment is always a dramatic shutdown, when in practice containment can be gradual, staged, and reversible to reduce collateral impact if early evidence is incomplete. Containment also depends on knowing what normal business operations look like, so you do not confuse routine behavior with attacker behavior and block legitimate processes. The SOC supports this by attaching context, identifying critical dependencies, and communicating clearly to the decision makers who authorize disruptive steps. When containment is guided by SOC evidence, the organization reduces harm while preserving the ability to learn what happened. Eradication is the phase where the organization removes the cause of the incident and the attacker's ability to return using the same foothold, and it is distinct from containment because it aims for removal rather than limitation. In eradication, the SOC plugs in by helping confirm what the attacker used, what artifacts or changes were introduced, and what access pathways must be closed based on the evidence gathered during analysis. This might involve identifying compromised accounts, identifying systems that show signs of unauthorized change, or identifying persistent behaviors that suggest the attacker established a way back in. The SOC's role is not to guess at eradication actions, but to support precise decisions by showing what was touched and what patterns indicate persistence or repeated access. A common beginner mistake is assuming that restoring a system or changing a password automatically eradicates the threat, when attackers often create multiple access paths. Eradication requires careful scope validation and confirmation steps so that the cause is actually removed. The SOC contributes by verifying that suspicious activity stops for the right reasons and by watching for signs of recurrence during and after eradication steps. Recovery is the phase where systems and services are returned to normal operation in a way that is trustworthy, and this is where the SOC's ability to monitor and validate becomes just as important as the restoration work itself. Recovery is not simply turning services back on, because it includes verifying that restored systems are not still compromised, verifying that accounts and permissions are in a safe state, and verifying that monitoring coverage is intact for the systems returning to service. The SOC plugs in by defining what normal should look like after recovery, tracking whether risky behaviors resume, and confirming that evidence pipelines were not damaged or bypassed during the incident. A beginner misunderstanding is thinking recovery ends when the business is back online, when in reality recovery ends when the business is back online with confidence that the threat is not immediately returning. If you restore quickly but fail to verify, you can end up in a loop where the same incident resurfaces, which is costly and damaging to trust. The SOC helps prevent that by measuring stability, monitoring for recurrence, and ensuring that the system is not returning to operation with the same weaknesses that enabled the incident. Recovery is where careful monitoring becomes reassurance. Learning is the final phase of the incident response cycle, but it is also the phase that determines whether the cycle truly behaves like a cycle instead of a one-time scramble. Learning includes capturing lessons about what the attacker did, what signals were missed, what signals were noisy, what decisions were slow, and what coordination points caused friction. The SOC plugs in heavily here because it owns much of the detection logic, enrichment, alert classification, and queue health practices that either helped or hindered response. This is also where tuning noisy detections and improving data collection pipelines becomes directly connected to incident outcomes, because you can link changes to real gaps revealed by the event. A common beginner misunderstanding is thinking lessons learned is a meeting where people talk about what went wrong, when the more valuable result is concrete changes to telemetry, workflows, and decision criteria. Learning should also improve the transition between routine operations and incident mode, such as clarifying escalation triggers or improving the evidence package required at handoff. When the learning phase is handled well, the SOC becomes faster and more confident in the next incident because the system has truly improved. That is how maturity is built. To see where the SOC plugs in most clearly, it helps to view the cycle as two connected tracks, an evidence track and an action track, where evidence informs action and action changes what evidence you can still observe. In the evidence track, the SOC collects, normalizes, enriches, and correlates telemetry, then translates it into hypotheses and validated findings. In the action track, the organization contains, eradicates, and recovers, making decisions that can change the environment quickly. The connection point is communication, because the SOC must communicate what is known, what is uncertain, and what is recommended based on evidence, while decision-makers communicate what actions are approved and what constraints exist. A mistake teams make is letting action outrun evidence in ways that destroy visibility, such as taking steps that wipe volatile information or break logging pipelines without capturing what will be needed later. Another mistake is letting evidence work delay action so long that the attacker spreads, because perfect knowledge is not required to take safe containment steps. The SOC's job is to keep evidence and action in balance, pushing toward clarity while enabling timely steps that limit harm. When you can explain this balance, you demonstrate true understanding of where SOC operations belong in the cycle. Another essential way the SOC plugs into the cycle is through escalation and case management, because incidents are not only technical events, they are coordination events that require shared understanding across shifts and teams. In routine operations, alerts may be handled and closed by one analyst, but in incident mode, work becomes parallel and shared, with multiple people collecting evidence, performing containment, coordinating communications, and tracking decisions. The SOC supports this by maintaining consistent alert classification, ensuring each investigative thread is documented, and grouping related signals so the incident is seen as one story rather than 1,000 disconnected fragments. Clear documentation preserves the evolving scope, such as which accounts are suspected, which systems show signs, and which evidence sources were queried, which prevents repeated work and prevents gaps. Escalation practices also ensure the incident reaches the right authority level at the right time, and that authority is engaged with enough evidence to act. A beginner mistake is assuming escalation is just forwarding an alert, when good escalation includes a crisp evidence summary and a clear statement of what decisions are needed. When escalation and case management are strong, incident response becomes coordinated rather than chaotic. The incident response cycle also relies on the SOC to maintain the health of the monitoring system during an incident, because incidents can degrade monitoring at the worst moment. Attackers may attempt to disable logging, flood telemetry, or tamper with evidence sources, and even legitimate containment actions can unintentionally cut off data flows. The SOC plugs in by watching for signs that visibility is shrinking, such as source silence, parsing failures, unusual ingestion delays, or sudden changes in event volume that are inconsistent with known actions. This monitoring of monitoring is not a luxury, because without it you can mistake a lack of alerts for a reduction in attacker activity, when it might actually be a loss of telemetry. The SOC must also adjust detection expectations during incident mode, because activity patterns change when containment steps are taken and when teams access systems for response. A beginner misunderstanding is treating detection logic as static, when in reality incident mode may require temporary adjustments to focus attention on high-signal behaviors and to avoid drowning in expected operational changes. The goal is to keep the evidence stream trustworthy while the environment is changing rapidly. When the SOC maintains monitoring integrity, it protects the entire cycle from drifting into blind response. As the cycle unfolds, the SOC's influence can be seen in how quickly the team can answer a set of practical questions that appear in every incident. even when the technical details differ. Those questions include how the incident was detected, what the suspected entry point is, which identities and systems are involved, whether the activity is ongoing, what the attacker's goal appears to be, and what the likely business impact is. Answering these questions quickly requires both data readiness and reasoning discipline, because the raw events must be interpreted and connected into a coherent narrative. Enrichment plays a major role because without asset criticality and identity privilege context, impact and urgency are hard to judge early. Correlation plays a major role because incidents often involve multiple systems, and isolated evidence can mislead if not connected properly. Documentation plays a major role because the narrative evolves, and the team must track what is known and what is still uncertain. Beginners often believe incident response is about finding one smoking gun, when the real skill is building a consistent story from many small, reliable observations. The SOC is the function that makes those observations usable. A final point to cement is that the incident response cycle is not only a technical sequence, but also a discipline of switching modes correctly, because different phases demand different priorities and different definitions of success. In detection and analysis, success is clarity and scope understanding, while in containment, success is limiting harm quickly without unnecessary disruption. In eradication, success is removing the attacker's foothold, while in recovery, success is restoring trustworthy operations, and in learning, success is improving future readiness. The SOC plugs in by recognizing the mode shift early, adapting workflows from alert handling to incident handling, and maintaining consistent evidence and communication across the phases. A common beginner mistake is staying stuck in analysis mode, collecting more and more evidence while the incident spreads, or jumping to action mode, taking disruptive steps without enough evidence to target them wisely. The cycle model exists to prevent those extremes by giving the team shared phase goals. When you know what phase you are in, you know what kind of work to prioritize and what kind of decisions to support. That clarity is what keeps response from turning into chaos. As we conclude, remember that mastering the incident response cycle is really about mastering coordination between evidence, decisions, and action over time. And the SOC is the function that keeps evidence and decision speed aligned across every phase. Preparation sets the conditions that make response possible. Detection and analysis turn signals into validated understanding. Containment limits harm. Eradication removes the cause. Recovery restores trustworthy operations. And learning improves the system so the next incident is less chaotic. The SOC plugs in by building and maintaining telemetry readiness, creating actionable alerts and escalation practices, correlating evidence quickly, supporting decision-makers with clear summaries, and monitoring the monitoring system so visibility remains trustworthy. When the SOC is strong, the cycle feels controlled because everyone knows what phase they are in and what success looks like next. When the SOC is weak, the cycle collapses into improvisation because evidence is slow, decisions are unclear, and actions are inconsistent. For exam purposes, the most important takeaway is that SOC operations are not separate from incident response, but are the connective tissue that makes each phase faster, safer, and more coherent. If you can explain where the SOC plugs in across the cycle with this level of clarity, you will be able to reason through incident scenarios confidently instead of relying on memorized phrases.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.